Hello everyone. With the release of Amnesia Rebirth closing in, I have decided to create a new retrospective video. While waiting for Rebirth, I have replayed both SOMA and The Dark Descent. I have always found that whenever the two are discussed or compared, people tend to argue over which was scarier, and the majority seem to argue in favour of The Dark Descent. So to go a bit deeper on this topic, I'm going to briefly delve into both games and compare the atmosphere, encounters, audio-visual design, and story, giving each category a score from 1 to 5 for both games. These scores are of course my own subjective opinion, and I welcome any and all discussion or input from you, the viewer. So let's begin. Atmosphere is quite possibly the single most important thing to get right when it comes to horror. It's what creates the feel of the game and assists your imagination in creating the world around you. Frictional are masters at the kind of world building that helps create anticipation and immersion. This enables your mind to run free and become susceptible to the reality of the character you control, without the need for too much dialogue or explanation. Here are a few locations from each game which have their own distinct tone. You can see how the sights and sounds all create a different feeling, from sinister with a touch of madness, to supernatural ritualistic panic, to foreboding with a sense of isolation. SOMA does a great job of making you feel like you're in a vast, dark ocean, but I feel like they could have done slightly more with this. Some extra far-off sights and sounds in the distance as you scale the ocean floor could have made the underwater sections more interesting, but instead they mostly just serve as point A to point B intermissions. Amnesia The Dark Descent, on the other hand, separates its intense sections with hubs or puzzle rooms, which is a bit more video gamey, but it builds a great sense of relief and pacing while leading you to memorable locations. SOMA foregoes a lot of video game mechanics compared to The Dark Descent for the sake of realism, but it also uses less ambient music for the same reason, which can make locations and sections seem less memorable or more dull. While both games do a brilliant job at conveying the emotions and tones they want to establish, the more sinister and dark feeling of Amnesia slightly edges SOMA out for me. Encountering enemies is the peak of terror in these games, so the way the player discovers them needs to be carefully considered so as not to disappoint. SOMA did a good job in adding more variety to the way you interact with the enemies in its world, but at the same time it had a couple that felt slightly lackluster. Here is a brief preview of each SOMA enemy and how they interact with the player. Most of these encounters are fantastic and each require a different approach. The Leviathan looks imposing but had too little build up. As mentioned before in the atmosphere section, maybe if it had some previous sightings or could be heard in the distance in earlier travel sections, it would have been a great reveal. The construct is also fairly underwhelming, but it's the first enemy in the game and probably there just to ease you in. Now for comparison, here are the Amnesia enemies and their interactions. As you can see, there's a lot less visual and mechanical variety, but none are particularly underwhelming, besides maybe the shadow. The big problem here is that they can mostly all be handled in the same way: hide and wait until it's okay to come out, whereas SOMA forces you into close proximity with its monsters quite often. The variety of the enemies and the way you are forced to interact with them gives SOMA the win in the encounter category. Now we're going to compare some of the sights and sounds from each game. This category may seem similar to Atmosphere, but it's more tangible. It's how immediately terrifying the things you see and hear can be. These are the images and noises that stick with you for days or even years after you play the game. Your first clear sighting of a grunt, running for your life as you hear the water lurker closing in from behind, or coming face to face with Terry Akers as he lifts you off the ground. Here are a few parts from each game that really terrified me on my first playthroughs. These are all moments I will never forget. Both games, in my opinion, receive a perfect score when it comes to sound design. A lot of the terror in Amnesia comes directly from its sound. The water lurker, for example, might be the single most successful monster in the game when it comes to scaring people, and it's virtually invisible. The brute's distant bellowing is also horrifying. Where Amnesia falls behind slightly is in the visual presentation. The monsters up close and in certain lighting don't look quite as intimidating as SOMA's. So while both games get a top score in sound, I have to rule in favour of SOMA overall because of its aesthetic evolution. This is the most subjective part of the video, because the story must resonate with you in order to create a strong sense of fear or empathy. SOMA is wider in scope, yet more grounded in reality when it comes to its story, while Amnesia is mostly focused around Daniel and his own path. In SOMA, the world as we know it has been drastically altered by a meteor strike. All that's left of mankind is a hellscape at the bottom of the ocean, and the Ark, an attempt at preserving humanity. SOMA is very introspective. It throws a lot of tough choices at you along the way, and that is where the true horror of the story lies. Amnesia is very much centered around Daniel, Alexander, the curse, and the orb. It's less about decision making and more about uncovering and confronting the unspeakable actions you have already taken before the game even began. Maybe with Rebirth we'll understand even more about the curse and its origins. Both stories are well told and present the player with horrifying realities, but the question is, which one affected us more? A terribly bleak and nightmarish future for the human race as a whole? Or a more personal story of a man, his atrocities, and a path to redemption? I have given both stories an even score. Although they are of a different scope, each one was well crafted and got its point across to me flawlessly. This leaves our final score at 18-17, with SOMA winning by the smallest possible margin. I love both of these games and cannot pick one over the other when it comes to how scary they were, or how much I enjoyed them. So in the end, the final verdict is up to you.
Catherine? Catherine! I can't believe we actually made it.
Well, we did.
I'm so relieved.
It's okay, Simon. Everything's all right now.